welcome to the Charlotte City Council strategy session. This session is a time that we learn about issues that are coming up to us for decisions. It's the opportunity for council members to discuss, question each other, and to spend some time just getting an idea of where we stand before we move to a more formal vote on any issue. So I want to call this meeting to order and welcome everyone who's joining us either virtually or in person. Tonight's meeting is being held as a virtual meeting in accordance with the electronic statutes, and all those requirements of that statute have been met. We have available the public and the media. You're able to view this on the government channel, the city's Facebook page, or on the city's YouTube page. I'd like to begin with introductions of those of us that are in the building this afternoon, and we'll have staff and council members introduce themselves. And we'll start with our city attorney, then we will go to those that are the council members joining us virtually this afternoon. Mr. Baker?
Patrick Baker, city attorney.
Tarek Bakari, District 6.
Larkin Eggleston, District 1.
Marcus Jones, city manager.
Vi Lyles, mayor.
Julie Eiselt, Mayor Pro Tem and serving at large. Billy Tons, interim deputy city clerk.
Donata Jackson, Office of Constituent Services.
And now we'll start with the members joining us virtually, the at-large members.
Dimple Ajmera, at large.
Greg Phipps, at large.
Braxton Winston, at large.
Malcolm Graham, District 2.
May Johnson, District 4.
Good evening, everyone. Matt Newton, District 5.
Ed Driggs, District 7.
All right, thanks everyone for your introductions. Before we proceed to the business of the agenda, tonight I have some sad news to share about the death of a member of our City of Charlotte team. Over Labor Day weekend, Katie Sparrow Hedrick passed away following a brief battle with cancer. Katie came to the city's Housing and Neighborhood Services Department in 2013, where she served as a division manager. As a longtime media contact person for neighborhood and business neighborhood services, she was well known with local reporters and always did a great job for our community, and especially in her role. She leaves behind her husband and their twin one-year-old daughters. Please keep Katie's family in your thoughts and prayers. We know that this is a tough time for them, as it is a difficult time for her colleagues at the city that she worked with. It's very tough. I do also want to recognize someone who is being honored to be here with us for 100 years. I'd like to say to Marvin Siegel that we recognize your birthday, your 100th birthday, on September the 12th. I know that you moved to Charlotte just recently, 6 years ago, and you've really adopted our city as your new home. And I really appreciate the idea that you say Charlotte is a beautiful place and every day is a beautiful day in Charlotte. I understand that you were kind of a cantankerous dad to Marcy Shealy, but that's okay because she's pretty cantankerous herself. I know that it took Marcy and your wife, who's passed away last year, Joyce, to teach you the lessons of becoming a Democrat, and that you finally made the open admission after years of voting Democratic just because you could. We know that you served us in the 515th Field Artillery Battery and saw extensive action in Europe during World War II, and that you are a part of the greatest generation. You'd be pleased to know the London School of Economics is some place that he attended, Mr. Driggs and a few of our other economists that watch us and serve us. They now have another colleague to rely upon. And so, to Marvin Siegel, we wish you a happy 100th birthday. So thank you, everyone. We now will go to our agenda. We have 3 topics tonight. Connect Beyond update. All of us are familiar with that. The American Rescue Plan update as well, and the Exotic Animals Ordinance review. So I'm going to ask the manager to kick off where we will start with the staff presentations. And remember that this is a time for the topics to be examined, reviewed, all questions asked. There's no, what do they say? There's no bad question to ask. So please. So Mr. Jones.
Thank you, Mayor and members of council. So tonight we'll have a presentation on Connect Beyond, and I believe we will have a tag team presentation with John Lewis, who is the CEO of CATS, and Geraldine Gardner, who is the Executive Director of the Central Carolina Regional Council. So, John, I will kick it over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Manager. And good evening, members of City Council. It's a pleasure to be here with you this evening to discuss what has been quite an effort over the last several years in launching Project Connect Beyond. CATS and the Central Carolina Council of Governments led a 2-year community engagement process designed to better understand our region's greatest transportation challenges and opportunities. Elected officials, planners, medical and educational institutions, transportation agencies, economic developers, employers, and workforce leaders were asked what mobility needs and transit-focused outcomes could be enhanced through regional cooperation and coordination. That effort culminated in a 2018 summit at the University of North Carolina at Charlotte, where the region supported the development of a regional transit plan through a CATS and Central Carolina partnership. In March of 2020, CATS, Central Carolina, and 6 transportation planning organizations and 17 transit providers kicked off Connect Beyond, a regional transit plan for a 2-state, 12-county region. Since then, the team has conducted technical analysis and collaborated with elected officials, government staff, and community stakeholders to develop a comprehensive set of recommendations. Tonight, I will be highlighting key elements of the study and the recommendations, and then turn the microphone over to my counterpart and colleague at Central Carolina, Geraldine Gardner, to discuss next steps. Next slide, please. As our region continues to grow, access to reliable, efficient, and well-connected transportation options is one of the most important factors to ensure everyone can benefit. We need to find solutions to promote and harness economic growth while helping our neighbors and visitors easily get where they want and need to go. This will require collaboration, insight, creativity, and a bold vision. We want to, through this effort, increase economic competitiveness, improve transportation choices, enhance public transit, promote sustainable regional growth, advance social equity, and encourage environmental stewardship. Next slide. The CATS 2030 plan started as a regional conversation in the 1990s that led to a successful 1998 Mecklenburg County transit sales tax. Core to the Connect Beyond effort now is the incorporation of the 2030 Transit System Plan and the Transformational Mobility Network. Next slide. The implementation of the TMN provides a foundation for the Connect Beyond recommendations as we work to build out the 2030 plan, provide more frequent bus service, and develop mobility hubs that better serve our neighborhoods and communities. Next slide. Key to all the Connect Beyond recommendations are strategies to move mobility forward. In a region growing as fast as ours, a mobility plan must be bold and ready to meet the future needs. Next slide. To improve mobility in our region, we need to develop a seamless multimodal transportation plan that is built upon a foundation of land use supporting mobility options, from paratransit to bus service to high-capacity transit such as commuter rail, light rail, and bus rapid transit. We will accomplish this through the following steps: Next slide. To implement the Connect Beyond recommendations, the region will need to advance the following mobility moves: create mobility-friendly places, expand mobility choices, strengthen rural to urban connections, building a better bus network, and investing in strategic mobility corridors. Next slide. We've developed strategies to support vibrant, pedestrian-friendly communities that have convenient access to public transit services. Examples of the key recommendations include adopting transit-supportive development policies that are unique to each community, involve transit agencies in local land use development processes, and concentrating growth along high-capacity transit corridors. Next slide. Expanding mobility choices. The technologies of moving people are changing rapidly. Our plans and approach should be nimble and future-ready for what's to come. Under this move, the study recommends a regional commuter choice program led by Centralina, implementation of a regional network of mobility hubs where all transportation modes can connect with each other, and then training the workforce of tomorrow for the electrification efforts and on-demand services that have continued to flourish over the last several years. Next slide. Strengthening rural to urban connections. What makes the Connect Beyond region so unique and special is the diversity of its geography. The Connect Beyond region is made up of rural counties, suburban areas, and a major metropolitan city. We've developed strategies to improve mobility and transportation choices for those who choose to live and work in rural communities. Therefore, improving coordination and leveraging procurement opportunities between larger transit providers with paratransit and human service providers, and also developing joint scheduling and funding models to enhance cross-county trips, especially medical trips. Next slide. Building a better bus network. The backbone of any successful regional transit system is a well-coordinated, frequent, and reliable bus network. To achieve the city's CAP goals and to move residents that are here today and those who will relocate here in the future, the team recommends a transit mobility education campaign, joint procurement amongst agencies to increase our buying power, and exploring creation of a regional fare structure. Next slide. Our region has 17 providers. They range from fixed route providers such as CATS and ICATS, operating regular routing and timetable, and regional connectors which provide service to rural areas of the region, connecting to urban areas. The study also recommends that each provider come together to plan and schedule services comprehensively. Next slide. Building off the 2030 Transit System Plan and the Transformational Mobility Network, the team recommends an expanded network of high-capacity and strategic mobility corridors. Next slide. Corridors such as I-77 South and North, Highway 29, Highway 521 into Lancaster County, and Highway 74 into Gaston and Union counties are recommended as high-capacity corridors. Think light rail, commuter rail, or bus rapid transit. Each county is recommended to conduct studies determining the appropriate rapid transit mode, as well as implement near-term improved transit services to improve ridership. Strategic mobility corridors have been identified as key corridors connecting communities that need improved bus service, also providing linkages to high-capacity corridors. Next slide. Critical to building a better bus network and high-capacity transit recommendations is the implementation of mobility hubs across the region. This map represents and illustrates locations where existing and future services connect and would serve as ideal locations for transfers between lines, modes, and technologies. Next slide. In order for any plan to become a reality, momentum must be maintained. And here to talk about the critical next steps is Geraldine Gardner, Executive Director of Centralina Regional Council.
Thanks, John. I appreciate the opportunity to be with all of you this evening. And as you've heard and seen from John's portion of the presentation, there are important and bold ideas within Connect Beyond that will transform how people across our region move and our ability to be a globally competitive region. But the vision won't mean much without a solid plan for how we collectively approach implementation. Centralina is committed to moving from ideas to action to support our partners across the region as they take important steps to implement this plan and to continue to serve as the regional convener that we've been for the last 50 years. And we are so energized by the alignment between Connect Beyond, the TMN, and a host of other county or MPO-specific mobility plans. Together, we can continue to partner for regional mobility by focusing on generating priorities to carry out our mobility vision, supporting unified public education efforts to promote mobility benefits for all, regardless if someone ever takes public transport, and finally, pursuing a two-pronged approach to formalizing regional collaboration. In the near term, we can work together, building on existing agreements to implement recommendations. And in parallel, we can convene and expand the work of Connect Beyond's Funding and Partnerships Working Group to evaluate future regional partnership structures. Next slide. Moving our momentum forward also entails creating a realistic approach for how we'll pay for these recommendations. Our Partnerships and Funding Working Group identified these 4 recommendations, building on existing collaboration and the commitment to implement our shared mobility vision. First is flexibility. We need to build a regional coalition while also allowing each jurisdiction to develop a funding approach at their own pace. And in order to do that, we must engage in a sustained and coordinated funding effort, advocate with a unified regional voice, and develop clarity on funding sources, potential yield, and steps to implement new funding streams. Funding is a common theme around the region when discussing improving mobility option, and it's vital. But we've heard from our regional stakeholders that this is an issue that the region needs to work together on to get where we need to be. Next slide. So how do we get there? The good news is that we have the platform for regional collaboration and leadership already built through the Connect Beyond planning process. And looking at the near term or next 3 years, we believe there should be a focus on leveraging existing stakeholder capacities, working agreements, and coordination touchpoints. The chart you see here is a working concept for how we coordinate, ensure accountability, and have each implementing partner play to their strengths. Most importantly, all of this work would be done in coordination and alignment with our partners who play major roles in transportation and mobility initiatives happening throughout the region. Their leadership and support will be critical to our region's success, tied to near-term implementation and achieving our long-term vision for mobility. Next slide. Before we get there, we're really focused on ensuring this plan is released on time. You'll note here a slight change in schedule. We're going to be releasing this plan fully to the public on Monday, September 13th. And we're also focusing on ensuring that our region and their leaders are energized around the transformational potential of the 5 mobility moves. So this list here gives you a flavor of the briefings we've been holding with Charlotte area stakeholders, but similar efforts are taking place across the region. And as we ramp up for releasing the plan and stewarding its adoption, it's critical that we're taking the time to walk stakeholders through the 5 big moves and its associated recommendations. Next slide. Finally, I want to recognize the staff and elected officials who have participated in the various committees and on our Centralina board throughout the process. These individuals have met regularly over a year and a half to review technical inputs, provide feedback, and stay engaged at every step in the process. So on behalf of John and our teams, we want to thank everyone for their time and effort on this process. And then last slide. Just want to close out with some dates. Our full plan, as I mentioned, will be released for public view on September 13th. The recommendations are available now on our website, very detailed recommendations, including a really interesting and important tool that we didn't have time to talk about today, but it's our Equity Index, a GIS mapping service that allows people across the region to zoom into a particular community and look at lots of different equity indicators for transit access in their community. So this slide also outlines the endorsement process, and we're also working to outline some key implementation next steps that we'll share at our final advisory committee meeting on September 29th. So thank you for the opportunity to contribute tonight. That concludes our presentation, and John and I will be happy to take questions.
No, Madam Mayor.
Yep, thank you, Mayor. One of the reasons that we came tonight, I know that this presentation was previously presented to the TAP committee, is to make sure that the council at a strategy session had an opportunity to see what's working beyond what we're doing with the TMN. And so as John and Geraldine had expressed earlier, this is something that not only the city of Charlotte but other jurisdictions pitched into a while ago for this study, and it should help inform decision making for the bigger picture as it relates to transportation and transit.
All right, so as I said at the beginning of the meeting, this session is really to have a deep dive discussion, not just for understanding, but points of view that the council members may have so that everyone can hear from each other. So I'm going to recognize the Mayor Pro Tem, followed by Council Member Driggs.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and John and Geraldine, thank you for the presentation. A couple questions for you. This was probably more for Geraldine, but in your organization, how many counties are in your organization? Do you have responsibility, coverage for?
So we serve all 9 counties in and around Charlotte, but 8 of our 9 counties are official members of the organization, so all of them except Rowan County.
Okay.
And we have 60 municipalities.
So I'm interested to know how it works functionally when you're talking about 2 states and 12 counties and getting those others that aren't in the 9-county group to the table. And I think the important, I guess what's behind that a little bit is, as we know, it's so critical to get everybody on board but moving at the same time on all of this. So I wondered if you could speak to that a little bit in particular. And then my second part of that is, how do you do that in a way that really gives our small towns and rural counties the ability to highlight what's important to them, right? Because they're not talking about light rail, they're talking about bus stops and sidewalks sometimes, and it is critically important to them in their regions for their economies, but it might be different than what we're prioritizing. So I wondered if you could just speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really important question. So one of the ways that we're engaging the counties and the stakeholders outside of the Central Line or core 9-county footprint is through the really kind of active engagement and partnership with our metropolitan planning organizations across the region. So Cleveland County is part of the Gaston Cleveland Lincoln NPO, and so we are engaging through that body those stakeholders in the Connect Beyond process. Same thing on the South Carolina side. In addition, we are also in active partnership and collaboration with our sister COG, the Catawba Regional Council, that represents a portion of the study area on the South Carolina side. So using the existing organizations that we have that specialize and have the technical expertise in transportation is really one of the main ways that we're engaging outside of the Central Line of footprint. With regard to your question on the needs of small communities and rural communities, we've had such a robust engagement process over the years to identify what mobility concerns people have. Connect Beyond started all the way back in Connect Our Future, which was 7+ years ago, where our region came together to identify mobility as being one of the things that was holding us back. So we've had our finger on the pulse of needs, but needs change over time. We look to our board of delegates that all have a representative on our board to help us understand those needs. We look to our NPOs to help us understand those needs. And I think that's one of the main focuses of Connect Beyond, is that we want to find, through the recommendations, a way to meet everybody where they are. You know, building a better bus network might be a transformational investment in Anson County. We had a briefing with our Anson County delegate just today, and he was talking about how important it was to connect his community members to access, to enable them to see specialized medical appointments in Charlotte. So it's a range of different tools, but I think this plan provides something for everyone. And it's just important that we allow those different perspectives to come to the table.
Okay, thank you. And just to that point, I'll just finish by saying I appreciate you saying that about their comments about our bus system, because that is the most critical piece of all of this for so many of them. Even if it's the bus system connecting to the light rail so they can get into Charlotte for jobs. But we have to make sure that we've got that investment in our existing system to make it as robust as possible before we really look at new projects. So thank you. Thank you both for that.
All right, Mr. Driggs.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm inspired by the Mayor Pro Tem's passion for the buses, which I share. So thank you for that, Julie. I'm pleased to see that we're finally moving to a regional intergovernmental level with this plan, having pursued it by ourselves for so long. So that's a positive development. I guess one question I have is, does this process fully incorporate what was our mobility plan, the one that was considered by the Mobility Task Force? Is this where we're going with the things that we've been talking about for the last couple of years?
I'll let John take that one.
Yes, I'm sorry, Councilman, there were parts of your question that I missed. Would you mind restating that again, please?
I'm referring to the process that we've had for the last couple of years with the Mobility Task Force and the whole plan that we developed and considered. And I'm asking whether that plan is now subsumed into the activity that's described to us tonight.
Yes, thank you, Councilman. I think, as we stated earlier, this really began with a conversation, not just regionally, but how we build out our core transit services here in Mecklenburg County. And so the 2030 plan has evolved into discussions surrounding the Transformational Mobility Network, which also serves as the core foundations for Connect Beyond. We can't talk about high-capacity corridors in Gaston, Iredell, and other counties without first building out the core infrastructure here in the center of the region. And so these plans work together, and I think the conversations surrounding the CATS 2030 plan, the Transformational Mobility Network, just logically falls into the subsequent discussions on a regional basis.
Okay, I think I have questions along, frankly, the same lines as the Mayor Pro Tem's. I'm curious to see in practice how the governance and the coordination here works. At some point, we get down to the level where we need firm commitments from people. We need to talk about how we share the costs. This is where we kind of got stalled, frankly, before. For example, we talked about a referendum on a sales tax, which I guess would have been a Mecklenburg County one, but when will the public have a chance, and what members of the public will have a chance to weigh in on the principal funding mechanism for this plan?
So you raised some very important points, and we're frankly not there yet. I think we have the purpose of this planning effort was to create the vision. What can we rally around as a region? What are those core components, which are represented in the 5 mobility moves and the map that John showed with the mobility hubs and the strategic mobility corridors? There's a lot more work that we need to do to dig down into each of these moves and to develop the type of specific funding proposals and governance structures that need to guide its implementation. So one of our recommendations is to take the partnerships and funding working group that we had within Connect Beyond that started to take steps in that direction. But as we looked at regional transit authorities and we looked at governance structures across the country, that there was a lot more to research than what we had time to talk about through this process. And so that's one of the major things that we have to do next. Is we have to parallel track implementation in some areas where we can make progress for the people who are taking transit and want to move differently today, while we're working on these very important, very complex, very sensitive conversations around governance and funding.
Great. Well, I think it's a constructive new direction, and I look forward to hearing more as you progress with those inquiries. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Driggs. Ms. Ajmera, you're up.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Well, I'm encouraged by the regional mobility conversation here. Is Central Lena the leading agency till we figure out the governance model here?
I think we're playing the role that we've played in the region, which is to set a table and invite people into that conversation to have these discussions. Yes, whether or not we're the ultimate agency to house such an entity there's a lot more discussion to be had on that.
Thank you. So my question around 2 states and how that would all work was addressed earlier. So thank you for answering that question. So I understand that our transportation mobility network and this Connect Beyond will work hand in hand, because I realize that one is not possible without the other and vice versa. So does that mean that we have the regional support and endorsement for our transportation mobility network?
That's a great question. I think all of our regional stakeholders understand that we need successful mobility in Charlotte in order for the rest of the region to thrive. So I think as we're going through our conversations with the counties over the next 2 weeks and talking to our delegates, we can certainly ask them how they would answer that question, because they ultimately need to weigh in. But from where I sit and representing my organization, I can say that we need the TMN to be successful so that Connect Beyond can be successful.
Fair enough. I'd be interested in hearing stakeholders' feedback in terms of our transportation mobility network and how that is critical for us to build Connect Beyond and moving forward. Other questions I have around funding and timeline, I think it's too premature at this point, so I'm sure I'll have more questions later for you, Geraldine. Thank you so much for your presentation.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Ms. Ajmera. Mr. Winston, you're recognized.
Thank you. I just have a couple of comments, really just building on Ms. Gardner's comments, Mr. Lewis's comments, and my colleagues' comments. I agree with Mr. Driggs that it's any work that we do around regional transportation is not going to it's not going to be as successful as it can be if we, from a city council perspective and a staff perspective, are having large gaps in time and work. It's not going to work if we have a slide presentation one day and don't really kind of dive into the work after it, and then come back to it a couple months later, and then we're all kind of left asking, well, you know, how did things sneak up on us? So as this kind of goes through the next steps of plan endorsement, I think we should think about how our transportation and planning committee and council might work with our staff to kind of direct them to work within this plan. You know, a couple slides back, there was a lot of different steps and a lot of work that needs to be done. And I was hearing time periods of 2-3 years, not decades in the future. So the I think if council and senior staff really think about how do we think about future workflow as this plan gets adopted, it could be really helpful in making sure that we're pushing the work forward and not being kind of the hurdle stopping progress in the region. So thank you for this work, and I look forward to diving into it.
Thank you, Mr. Winston. Is there anyone else that would like to speak? All right. I think, Mr. Jones, is there anything that you need from the council? Are there any questions that the council has among each other beyond those that have been spoken tonight in the notes or in the previous council members' comments? Mr. Jones, do you have enough to keep going?
Yeah, that's great. So thank you, Mayor, members of council. And we gave you a pre-read last week, and I think I'd summarize it this way. If you think about Charlotte Moves, it was specific to Charlotte. If you think about the Transformational Mobility Network, it encompasses Mecklenburg County and all the county, the city, and the towns. And Connect Beyond goes into the 2 states and 12 counties. So for us, we thought it was important to have this conversation with the council at a strategy session so that you could see how all of these work together. And now that we have this that's before you, as well as the Alliance's economic impact study a couple of weeks ago, we believe that we're able to provide you with more information. Much to Mr. Winston's point is that, stop and go. We needed to get all of this information out to feel more comfortable to continue the conversation.
All right. Thank you. Do you want to introduce our next topic, the American Rescue Plan Act update?
Will do. Thank you, Geraldine, and thank you, John. So what we're attempting to do tonight, Sean Heath will come back and give you a bit of an update from where we are with the ARPA funds, and I will do a little bit of a spoiler alert. One of the things that we have learned is that because the City Council had a very good experience, I believe, with getting the CARES funds out, and because we were limited to a number of cities across the country that had the CARES funds, there was a process that was already in place, and we're finding that as more jurisdictions have these ARPA funds, they're really starting from scratch. And one of the things that we want to make sure that we don't do is to get too far out in front of some of our other municipalities, especially this county and the CMS, where we have an opportunity for us to work together. So Sean is going to talk a bit about some of the issues that are present with us, but one of the things that we would like to do as we talk about things such as the fall strategy planning session, or other word for this retreat, as well as other council business meetings, to set the stage for these discussions as we move forward, but to give you a bit of an update today, and also talk with you about 2 areas we'd like to focus on. So with that, I'll turn it over to Sean.
Thank you, Manager Jones. So this is a very brief update. The heavier lifting will be on September 27th when I return with the full set of recommendations for the first installment of the American Rescue Plan funds. Tonight, we'd like to share 3 things quickly. One is an update on the rental relief programming that we've had in place since last year. Second, provide a bit of perspective on the community engagement that staff has been doing over the last year, which has informed our thinking around the use of stimulus funding. And then finally, just quickly close out on next steps over the remaining weeks of September. Tonight I'm having trouble with the slides. Oh, got it. Sorry. Thank you. Rental relief has obviously been in the news a lot over the last couple weeks in light of the Supreme Court's decision to overturn the CDC eviction moratorium. So we wanted to give you a quick snapshot of what we've done and importantly, what we have staged going forward. So this slide is combining a number of different stimulus plans. The CARES Act from March of 2021, the CARES Act of March of 2020, the December 2020 Stimulus Act, and then also more recently the American Rescue Plan. So the green bars on this slide show the money that we've already put into the community with stimulus funds to provide either mortgage relief, rental relief, or utility relief. And I know there have been accounts from across the country with certain jurisdictions that for various reasons have had a hard time getting money into the hands of those that need it the most quickly. We have not had that challenge here, and kudos to Pam Weidman and her team and our partner DreamKey, who's helping us administer this funding. You can see that we have over $40 million over the last year that's been put in to rental utility and mortgage relief. On a go-forward basis, with the yellow bars, we have a little bit of just a tiny sliver, the 1.6 million of rental assistance from the December program remaining, which I'm certain we will spend this month. And you have staged in your August 9th business meeting an appropriation of $28.8 million in American Rescue Plan funding that is designated for rental relief, which we are in the process of finalizing our contract with DreamKey Partners in order to be in a position to put that money into the hands of those that need it most as quickly as we can. I should also mention that in addition to the things that we are doing, Mecklenburg County obviously has an intentional focus on this area as well. They have coincidentally around $30 million of their own stimulus funding that is in various stages of being deployed on a go-forward basis to support members of the county. And then I would also, just to close out on this slide, reinforce that there are a number of things that are happening with city staff, county staff, agency partners, crisis assistance, DreamKey, as I had mentioned before, behind the scenes to ensure we're not flat-footed as a community, given what we expect could happen in the months ahead as it relates to the eviction moratorium having been taken off the books. Okay, so moving away from rental and utility type support, there isn't really new information on this slide, but we want to keep these topics in the back of your mind, thinking ahead to the September 27th conversation on the American Rescue Plan. So just a quick reminder on the community-facing investments that Council will be deciding on in the weeks and months ahead. As I've mentioned before, one branch of the American Rescue Plan is the ARPA Home HUD program, which was $11.6 million allocated to the City of Charlotte. As I've said before, there's a fair amount of flexibility associated with that funding, tenant-based rental assistance, creation or preservation of affordable housing, a hotel-motel acquisition strategy and converting those assets into permanent supportive housing or emergency shelters. All of those things are eligible opportunities with that funding. Housing Director Weidman and I were talking earlier today, and there are a lot of opportunities swirling around the community, so we'll be putting our heads together and identifying a suite of recommendations that we can carry forward for Council to weigh in on in the near future. On the local fiscal recovery fund, which is the larger branch underneath of the American Rescue Plan for the City of Charlotte, as we've said before, it's $142 million in total, half of which was received in May of 2021. The other half will be received in May of 2022. And in terms of the big picture allocation for that funding, as I had shared with Council on July 19th, we believe that we can really focus on community support with the American Rescue Plan. However, there is $11 million that's been earmarked for city operations. There are a couple of specific things in play in that area. One relates to the presentation you received not that long ago related to COVID incentives and premium pay, for example, which are eligible for ARPA funding, and then also some IT network infrastructure upgrades, which are also eligible for ARPA funding, the types of things that will allow us to sustain and enhance the teleworking environment that's become so important to us in a COVID environment. So for all intents and purposes, you could consider that $11 million to have a good home as it relates to allowable uses for ARPA funding. With the community support, as I mentioned before, the only element of that $60 million where there's a firm earmark relates to the arts and culture strategy, which you've endorsed through the FY22 budget. $2 million of that 60 will be devoted to supporting that strategy in the first year, along with $4 million from the general fund. But the remaining balance will be up for conversation when we return for a report out on September 27th. As I mentioned before, on community engagement, we nibbled on this topic a little bit on July 19th, but I wanted to reinforce that staff is very aware of council's expectation that our use of stimulus funding be heavily informed by community input. So we took a moment to reflect on the last year and just wanted to quickly share with you various things that have been done or are in flight that demonstrating that we're taking the voice of the community into account as we cultivate these opportunities. So looking back to the May, June, July timeframe of last year, of course, with the COVID Community Recovery Task Force that was set up with 3 work groups focused on housing, small business, and the airport. On one hand, you might say, well, that feels stale at this point, quite some time has passed. But looking back at the recommendations that came through those work groups, it was interesting to see a lot of recurring themes that are just as relevant today. Business and workforce resiliency was a big theme. Housing stability, homelessness prevention, obviously big themes. And that's continuing to inform the thinking of Tracy Dodson as she's contemplating ideas with stimulus funding, Pam Weidman from Housing and Neighborhood Services as she's contemplating ideas around stimulus funding. So that work continues to bear fruit today for us. On the annual budget process, of course, that includes public input, and Budget Director Bergman had the foresight to include a very specific question in this year's survey, and the question was, what do members of the community think the City of Charlotte should invest in with its stimulus funds? And there were close to 700 individuals that answered that question, and the 3 items that rose to the top in their mind related to rental support, small business support, and digital inclusion. So, hundreds of members of the community weighed in, and that was back in the February, March timeframe. On the corridors of opportunity, with the workforce study and analysis that's being done in partnership with Ernst & Young, it's a very community input-driven process. There have been dozens of interviews that have been done with employers in corridors and workforce service providers. There was a survey that was done. I believe there were roughly 300 members of the community, primarily from the corridors, that responded to the survey. One key area of emphasis was asking these individuals, what are some of the things that are impediments for you to get a job or keep a job? So all of that work is obviously focused on what are the workforce capabilities and gaps and opportunities in corridors. Tracy has talked at the committee level and with council before about how all of this really folds underneath of the job strategy around Hire Charlotte. So a lot of exciting opportunities in that space and very, very much driven by community input. In terms of some current and ongoing things that are in place today, I'll just cherry pick a few things here on the slide. With the Charlotte-Mecklenburg 2025 Housing and Homelessness Strategy, you'll hear more about that next week. There's a progress report that Gene Woods from Atrium and Kathy Besant from Bank of America will provide to council next Monday night. They're in the process of providing a similar report to the Mecklenburg Board of County Commissioners this week. So I'll be interested to see that. So you hear more about the progress, but I would mention to you that it's a very stakeholder-driven approach. There are dozens of organizations from across the community, very diverse set of organizations that are actively involved in the work streams. We've held, I believe, 5 or 6 community input forums where hundreds of members of the community have had an opportunity to weigh in on the various strategies and initiatives that could support this community and the things we're trying to accomplish associated with housing and homelessness. And then the last thing I'd mention on here, of course, is things that you have put in place and that are around the bend, including the Neighborhood Equity and Stabilization Commission, which will serve as yet another forum for the community to weigh in on things of relevance to your priorities, which are of relevance to how the City of Charlotte will invest stimulus funding in the community. So just wanted to give you a 30,000-foot view of what I believe is a good balanced set of things that we've done that don't necessarily fall under a ARPA or stimulus plan feedback strategy per se, but when you start piecing them together, I think it demonstrates that a lot of work has been done to gain input from the community. And then finally, just to close out with next steps, as I mentioned, at the end of the month, we'll be back with a follow-up conversation where we left off on July 19th, which was roughly a dozen very specific investment opportunities, just to get that conversation going and we'll be back with our refined thinking. As the manager had mentioned, we've had a number of conversations. We continue to have conversations with our counterparts at the county and also Charlotte-Mecklenburg schools. Frankly, it's too soon to say exactly where those will land, but I think, the energy in those conversations is good. The level of commitment to finding opportunities for us to do things together is, in my view, very high. But it takes work and it takes time to settle in on what are those specific areas where we collectively, 2 of us at a time or 3 of us in certain instances, see something that we're mutually excited about and want to tackle together. So on the housing and homelessness front, I think there's early opportunities that we're in conversation with on the county as it relates to the 2025 strategy that I just mentioned, and hopefully all of that will bear fruit. With the school system and with the county, I'm still hopeful. There are a number of exciting things that we're contemplating around the digital inclusion space as an extension of what we did in the Access Charlotte program with the CARES funding, so public Wi-Fi, for example. I'm still hopeful and optimistic that we'll find an opportunity for all 3 of us to find a way to really come together and do something collectively in that space. So the next few weeks will give us time to continue those conversations, firm up our plans, and then we'll be back in front of you and look forward to that opportunity to present. That concludes the formal presentation, so I'd be glad to take any comments or questions.
Thank you, Chad. I want to say that I think a couple of days ago we received, or maybe a week ago, the eviction report and status update. And before, if anyone else wants to speak, I'd like to ask about when we started out, we were working really hard with community relations, and I believe we were working with crisis and I can't remember the other
Dream Key.
organization. But we were trying to figure out how to do this. With that 28 million, have we been able to address any of the urgency of this problem, or have we had to change any of our processes? What improvements or responses? Because I understand landlords are really getting behind.
Right.
And evictions are starting. What have we done to kind of adjust to the new normal for landlords as well as the tenants?
Sure. Yeah, 2 things briefly. One, on the process side. So we had received feedback early on that the process itself was a little cumbersome and it was just challenging to navigate, right? And we wanted to create the path of least resistance for individuals that were eligible to access the funding. So to Dream Key's credit, we had a number of conversations with them. And I feel confident that where we're at today is we have a process that's very efficient and it's customer friendly. But having said that, there are certain documentation requirements that we have no choice but to abide by. So with the stimulus funding, for example, there needs to be a demonstration, essentially a certification that the individual has experienced some sort of COVID hardship. It's more of a self-attestation, but it's not as simple as making a phone call and providing your name and receiving the stimulus funding. So, Pam and I have been involved in a number of conversations, and we're comfortable that where we've ended up now is a process that's as streamlined as it can be. On the strategic side, a number of things that have been done really over the last 30 to 60 days is just an evaluation of how to continue to prioritize the funding. So, for example, what you'll find now, different than 3, 4, 5 months ago, is individuals that have been served an eviction notice and have a hearing scheduled within 90 days will be the #1 priority category. And then moving on from there, it's really based on AMI. So individuals that are at the lowest income level become the 2nd priority level, and so on and so forth. So these resources are, tremendous at our disposal, but they are scarce. So from a strategy process perspective, we're doing everything we can to ensure that those individuals that are most in need have an opportunity to be prioritized in the process.
So I also remember we had a really great collaboration with the clerk of court as well as the sheriff's office. Are we continuing to see that kind of collaboration? Is there anything that they would suggest that would help us get this funding out that's possible?
So I will take that as a homework assignment. I don't have an answer for you immediately. I do know that there was a backlog of, I believe, 2,500 or 2,600 eviction cases that was reported a few weeks ago. So, clearly COVID had an impact on the capacity of the court system to move through these cases. So I will follow up with you on that one.
Yeah, I really would love to be able to see that, that at the first moment that they have the interaction with the court system, that they also have all the paperwork and all the things that you have to have. And I recall the clerk's office and the sheriff being very cooperative in that. So let's just ask them again, is there anything that we can do to help move this so that we can give both our tenants and landlords the ability to have these relationships and keep people housed, and keeping people housed. So thank you for that. So I have Mr. Phipps. Mr. Phipps, sorry I jumped in a little bit, but this has been, after I got that report, I remember writing down what else can we do. So thank you very much, Sean, for looking for what else can we do. Mr. Phipps?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I was interested in that second bullet under next steps. Aside from any introductory meetings we've had with the county and CMS, have we actually met with them subsequent to that to discuss any kind of plans, or is this still something that's in the works?
So, Mr. Phipps, if I captured your question, we are very much in active conversation with both the county and the school system. I'm meeting with them on about an every other week basis. We had discussions as a collective last week, and then I've had a one-off conversation here or there since then. So they are each working through a deliberate process, as are we. The county, I believe in early July, presented 7 pillars which will really drive their investment strategy. And, you know, they're embarking on an effort to develop taking those pillars and converting those into a strategic plan. So we can only really move as fast as our respective processes allow us to. Just as I've been sensitive and careful not to get ahead of City Council's headlights, each of my counterparts have done the same. So at some point we get to that stage where all three of us are far enough along where we can look each other in the eye and say, you know what, we see tremendous overlap in these 2 or 3 areas. We see mutual benefit. Let's go for it.
Yes, it is. Okay. My next question. In yesterday's Sunday Observer, they had a story in there about evictions that were occurring in the middle of the moratorium, and they specifically talked about a couple of apartment complexes in the east side. I was wondering, you know, they said that it, you know, they did an analysis, and of course it disproportionately affected black and brown residents of those complexes. But I was wondering, you know, as a city, were we aware that those evictions were occurring, or did we try to put any resources toward those areas to prevent those evictions?
I think two things I would mention. One is we haven't refreshed the heat map, but during the CARES Act, there was a slide that it's imprinted in my memory from a few months ago, both on the small business support programs and on the rental relief programs, that showed exactly where across the Charlotte community these investments were being made. And in both instances, I think what you saw was there's a tremendous clustering of these investments around the Crescent. So when I read that same article over the weekend, I couldn't help but think, I need to reach out to the team, and just out of curiosity, I wanted to see to what extent do our investments overlay with those particular zip codes. My suspicion is that we have a heavy investment in those zip codes, but I'll need to confirm that. And then on your second point, or related point, you know, it's interesting because the eviction moratorium was targeted. And so it was not a moratorium on all evictions. So, you know, evictions unrelated to individuals that were having a difficult time paying their rent due to a COVID hardship, that was very long-winded. But, you know, there are a lot of other scenarios where someone could have violated a lease term and they still could have been subject to an eviction during this entire period of time. There are also individuals who, for whatever reason, could not adequately demonstrate that their financial challenges were due to a COVID hardship. In those scenarios, they also could have been subject to an eviction. during this entire time. So there have been opportunities, or there have been evictions that have been occurring and that have been advancing. And now, of course, with the CDC moratorium not in place, everything has opened up. Did that answer your question, Mr. Phipps?
It's so partially, but the article did go on to talk about the amount of, I guess, disinvestment in some of the maintenance of some of these facilities. And they even talked about rental homes engaging in evictions. And I wanted to know, in as much as we have a lot of activity now with rental single-family homes, are inspections and such as that, is that subject to the city's jurisdiction to see, if the quality of those homes are suitable for rental in the same way as apartments are, or is that something outside of the scope of the city's influence?
I'm going to ask Housing Director Weidman to provide some perspective on that.
Good evening. Thank you, Sean. Mr. Phipps, just two things to add. We saw the same article that you referenced, and one of the things that we discussed with CRC, our colleagues in CRC, is doubling down, if you will, or targeting our eviction prevention education toward those zip codes as a part of our anti-displacement work that we're kicking off. So I do want you all to know that. In terms of if there are code compliances there, while we don't proactively inspect each apartment complex or rental housing unit in any particular area, if we have reason to believe either through our proactive field work or our reactive, if we get complaints, we are happy to go out and to inspect those properties. The other thing that I would say to you is that what's really important about this rental education is really helping people understand the value of having a long-term lease versus a month-to-month lease. So those are some of the things that we're trying to do to address the article that you saw. Thank you.
All right, Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Sean, I think point number 2 is really, is really important. When we talk about that engagement with the county and CMS, I know in any other circumstance, that's a lot of work to try to get those bodies together, but the expediency is something that's on my mind. And so when you look at the groups that have applied to help with certain programming, I hope that we can really recognize the organizations that have been partners with us before, that we know have the systems in place. I'm all for letting anyone apply for these things, but I think there's going to be, especially when we're talking about students, you're talking about having to choose amongst thousands of students to help. So scale of infrastructure with the organizations that apply, I think, is really important in their ability to ramp up fast and get the work done. So I hope my colleagues will support that notion. Thank you.
Point well taken. And our hope is on September 27th that we will be able to bring as many investment opportunities to you as possible that are implementation ready. So, my aspirational goal is that everything would be put in front of you and ready for a vote. If for some reason that's not the case, I think at a minimum we'd be at the point where we could segregate the opportunities and identify, here are the ones that are implementation ready. We know enough about it to hopefully answer questions that you would have and provide some perspective on where we see the value and let you make your decisions, whereas there may be other ones that reasonably and realistically we need to say we're excited about the opportunity, but we're going to need more time to work on it in the months ahead, and maybe it's more suitable for some future committee conversations. But we know we can't hold on to everything for too long.
All right. Councilmember Johnson, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mayor. That was a great presentation. I just have a few questions. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you just fine.
Good. Okay, thank you. So part of the process for the evictions in the county was to involve the Community Relations Committee, mediate between the landlords and the tenant. Do we have any numbers on the cases that we've heard since the beginning, and how much assistance we've provided in that process? Because that was a really good tool to avoid evictions, and that was one of the strategies we developed. Do we have a report on that, Ms. Weidman or Sean?
I'm looking for my partner again for some help.
Thank you, Councilmember Johnson. We do not, I cannot share with you a number off the top of my head, but we will take that as a homework assignment and come back and share with you the information in terms of when we started this up until this point, how many mediations we've provided around eviction.
Okay, because if council will recall, the part of the process is when evictions were filed, we were going to send information out to the tenants that the city had a program where we would mediate and hopefully avoid the eviction.
That is correct. And I'll also recall to you that we also worked directly with the courts to make sure that that information was directly in the court system as well. So we'll provide you a more thorough response on kind of all of our efforts around that.
Okay, and is that still an option?
Yes, yes, ma'am.
Okay. So I think there really needs to be education and promotion and marketing surrounding that is an option to avoid that eviction, because not just going in the paperwork, but I mean, do people know that? One of the things that I heard, and I thought this was so profound, that an eviction is for Black women what a criminal record is for Black men. It's a barrier to housing. So, and it affects, the Black population in an inequitable amount. So if we can try to avoid evictions on people's records, we want to do as much as we can. Many of the folks who live in the hotels and the motels, they're paying more than typical rent. It's just that they have this record. So I would like to see some type of program where we can help, first of all, avoid the eviction, but if it does happen, if we can kind of help individuals expunge the evictions from their records, helping them to pay off those balances, even if it wasn't, if it was COVID related primarily, but we really need to take a look on how we can remove that barrier. So I'd like to see that CRC report, if we're helping as many people as we can, because that was an exciting option. But if people aren't getting the message, then we have to do more, because it's cyclical. If they're getting evicted, then they can't get future housing. And also, to piggyback off what Mr. Phipps said, as far as landlords, and I've said this before, we need some type of landlord oversight database or something. That's another barrier for housing. I don't know if you all know, but a person can have an application fee of about $50 per person. And if there's four adults in the home, that's $200 per application. And if they're denied, this is happening over and over and over again. So if there's some type of something in the COVID funding or the ARP dollars that we can take a look at tracking these landlords. Some of those landlords that filed the evictions could have done them incorrectly or illegally, actually. So I would love to see if we're tracking this type of information or these type of practices by these landlords. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson. Mr. Graham is following Ms. Johnson. Mr. Graham?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. One, I think Councilmember Phipps asked the question that I was going to ask, and you did a very good job yourself in terms of kind of setting the table in terms of the collaboration where we were. So I will save everybody time and just go on to the next questionnaire. Thank you.
All right. Ms. Ajmira?
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. Some of my questions were already addressed. A couple that have not been addressed are around the rent relief program. So, Sean, thank you so much for providing an overview of the process that's been streamlined. Could you tell us what is the turnaround time once the application has been submitted now with this new process?
So right now, it's set up where applications are accepted during the first 15 days of each month, and then the remainder of the month is a review period. In terms of a specific number of days on average from when an application is submitted, I don't have a number in my head. Pam, do you know?
So while we don't have an actual number of days, Ms. Ajmira, some of it also depends on if there is additional information needed, discovered that it's needed during the review period. So as quickly as we can get them turned around, which the goal is to get everything that we get in out within that next 15 days. But one of the things we want to encourage people is really to follow up if there's additional or outstanding information required to process the application.
Thank you, Ms. Whiteman. So our goal is currently 15 days as long as the documentations have been submitted along with the application. I know other municipalities have started a process where the application is being initiated by a housing provider, and later tenant can actually provide sort of an approval. Has that been something that we have considered, where housing provider could initiate an application to expedite the process?
Yes, on the RAMP CLT, and I keep glancing at Pam for confirmation, but there is reference to, landlords can initiate this process and move it forward. Of course, there is a requirement, and I don't know exactly when the tenant fits into the equation, but they do have the ability to get the ball rolling. And I will say one of the important metrics that we're tracking is simply how quickly are we getting the money out the door. And when I was in front of you on July 19th, at that point, we had about $10 million remaining in the relief plan from December of 2020. And what I shared earlier today showed that we have 1.6 million. So we're definitely seeing the money move into the community fairly quickly.
Certainly, I think that's great to see that money is moving into the community. I'm just interested in seeing what's the turnaround time and if there is anything that we can do. I'm also interested in hearing the process where it's actually housing providers started. I know we have had several housing providers who had reached out where they had $100,000+ in past due balance. There were some concerns around the process. Certainly this was back in 2020. So I'm interested in hearing how the new process would have certainly changed or at least expedited the whole timeline.
Understood.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Ajmira. Mr. Winston? Mr. Winston?
I think Mr. Winston had to step away. He had his hand
He
up,
had
but
to
I think he
step
had to step
away.
away.
Okay, is
No,
there
I'm here.
anyone?
I'm here.
Oh, Mr. Winston?
Yes. Thank you for all the information. I thank for colleagues for pointing out all the good points. I'm particularly interested in the collaboration between us, Mecklenburg County, and CMS schools around the digital divide. I know we did a lot of work in this in the past, about this time last year. But I just want us to, be clear that right now we are in our third school year dealing with this pandemic, and so many of our kids are having to rely on digital things and digital training. So I'm wondering, as you are trying to, as you said, optimistic about the next steps. Is there anything that we can do, that council can do, to keep that conversation pushing forward, to give you any type of guidance so you don't feel like you are getting out in front of our headlights, as you said? What we didn't necessarily do last year was City Council didn't really engage County Commission or the school board directly to these ends. Are there any kind of conversations or things that we could do to get us on the same page? I've talked to some folks that are citizen groups that are working in this space, and I think there's certain urgencies about opportunities that are presenting themselves. So definitely want us to be able to pivot and maneuver swiftly around those opportunities. So is there anything that we can do to help to that end right now as we continue to go down into this third school year?
So, Councilmember Winston, thank you for that. I would say there are two areas, and it's been abundantly clear tonight, the discussions around housing and homelessness, and you bringing up the digital divide just now, two areas that we really believe that there are the opportunities to really collaborate with the county and the school system. As a matter of fact, I had a conversation with Superintendent Winston this morning, and we talked specifically about the digital divide. So if your question is there an opportunity for council, for electeds to talk to electeds? Absolutely, that'd be great. But I do want to make sure that everybody understands that staff to staff, there have been very good conversations, especially around these two key areas, the digital divide and housing and homelessness. But any help would be appreciated.
Is that the final question, Donata? Okay. Sean, thank you very much for the presentation. And I know we all look forward to hearing more with regards to next steps and to engaging our colleagues at the county and CMS level. So thank you. So with that, Mr. Manager?
Yes. So, Mayor Pro Tem, we do have Marie Harris, and I believe she will get some assistance from the city attorney here, Patrick Baker. What we did, there have been a number of emails that have come in asking where were we with the exotic animal ordinance review. And so just to put this back into perspective, there was a series of conversations, analysis as it dealt with what we called back then, I guess, circus animals. But in terms of the actual ordinance, it's really an amendment to the exotic animals ordinance. And so we believe that we had input from not only the council but the community, and there was a ordinance that we were working on, and then COVID came. So what I believe Marie is going to do tonight is just bring you back up to speed with what you had already, conclusion you had gotten to at that point, and see if this is ready to move forward at some point for a council vote. Did I get that right, Marie?
Yes, sir. Thank you so much. And again, I'm Marie Harris with Strategy and Budget. And if you'll bear with me, we're going to pre-COVID days for a minute just to refresh you, because I know it's been a year and a half since we've spoken on this topic. And as the manager said, tonight we're just giving an overview of where we've gone before as far as discussions around this topic, and then proposal for moving forward. Oops, sorry. And then back in November 2019, the city manager, based on feedback from council, mayor and council, there was a lot of feedback in the community and input around circus animals and the treatment of circus animals. And so he committed to giving a report to council on, okay, what do we currently have in place as far as provisions for protections around circus animals and benchmarks around that. And then he had staff prepare a report that was presented to you in January 2020. And then in February 2020, we came before you and presented that information. And then based on your discussions at that meeting, we moved forward into February 24th with a draft ordinance for your consideration. And we also had feedback from the community at that meeting. And there was additional discussions among council at that meeting, and there was a few future revisions proposed, and you voted to defer it to the next council meeting. And then in the meantime, we got hit with COVID and consideration, so our priorities shifted, and we were trying to allow time to have this where we could have a lot more in-person public engagement, but it's been a year and a half now. We had no way of knowing at the time that we would still be under these kind of restrictions and precautions. And again, we're still in the review part. When we're saying wild or exotic animals, we're speaking of animals that are typically found in a zoo or in the wilderness. They're not indigenous to the United States or North America, that somebody might fear property damage or bodily harm from. And they do not include animals customarily thought of as pets or domestic farm animals, fish, birds, or insects, even though it might get bodily harm from a spider, but that's not a wild or exotic animal in our case. And this is as defined from our ordinance. And again, just a review of current provisions. At the federal level, we have the Animal Welfare Act that provides for minimum standards, and we pulled just a couple that are relevant to our topic tonight. Handling of animals cannot cause stress, physical harm, or unnecessary discomfort, and physical abuse shall not be used to train, work, or otherwise handle animals. And at the state level, the state of North Carolina defines what animal cruelty is, and it also goes further to grant cities the authority to further regulate, define, and prohibit the abuse of animals. And since we've discussed this as a full council before, when I was before you last time, there is a pending legislation, House Bill 594, which was introduced in April 2021 to ban the use of wild and exotic animals in traveling shows. But it made it past its first reading and is in committee. We don't know if that will continue to move forward or not, but that's just a development since the last meeting. And again, for the city, we have specific to wild and exotic animals, we have what restraints are required, and that's more so to protect the public. We have what constitutes wild or exotic animals. That's what I kind of reviewed with you, the definition a minute ago. And then also who can keep, maintain, or possess these types of animals. Now moving forward to tonight, back in February 2020, we discussed with you adding these definitions of bullhook, electric prod, and whip just to the definition section, but more so this page is the meat of the changes that were being proposed. And if you look, I'll draw your attention to the yellow with the red strike through. Those are changed since 2020. So this shows everything that was there in February 2020, and then it's updated with the changes that we're recommending for you tonight. And so basically what it says, in addition to the state and federal minimum standards, we're proposing that no permanent or transient animal exhibition or circus shall induce or encourage animals to perform through the use of chemical, mechanical, electrical, or manual devices in a manner that is likely to cause physical injury or suffering. Further, the use of bull hooks, electric prods, or whips to handle, train, or otherwise interact with elephants, felines, and primates when they are on display performing or being trained is prohibited. All equipment used on performing animals shall fit properly and be in good working condition. So there's two components here. One, that you cannot use any device to cause injury or suffering. And then the second piece of this is you can't at all use bull hooks, electric prods, or whips. And while you're thinking through that, we'll go ahead and go to the next. So tonight we'd like to get your feedback on the proposed ordinance changes. And we're looking to publish the language for public review when we publish the agenda for our upcoming business meeting. And it's at your pleasure which meetings would be appropriate. And then we can receive public comment on the language and vote on ordinance changes. And whatever changes, if you do choose to make any changes, we'd like to have at least 6 months to give notice to businesses that use exotic traveling animals and also allow for animal care and control staff to be trained on these types of inspections. But with that, I'll go back to, this is the main page to get your feedback on for tonight.
All right, thank you very much. Is there any question or feedback that I think that this was moving along, and so unless there's some objection, I would say that the staff should go ahead and place it on the first available agenda. But I also want to open it up, and I see Mr. Newton. Mr. Newton, you're recognized. Good evening.
Me, Madam Mayor, thank you. I wanted to thank you, Marie. I wanted to thank staff for bringing this back in front of us. It does feel like it's been a very long time since we've had this conversation, and I'm trying myself. I do appreciate it, though, nonetheless. We've gotten countless emails pertaining to this, and I think it's certainly the time to be talking about this again. We know the trend across the country is to adopt these ordinances, and even here in the state of North Carolina, with the General Assembly considering the potential House bill, I think now is definitely the time. And my hope is that we do proceed forward with this, but given the fact that I feel like many of us are getting back up to speed on it, I feel like there are many folks that might have been taken by surprise that this is on our agenda tonight. That I would be in favor of, I think the options were either our meeting on the 13th or the 27th, I believe you said, Marie, right? So I would be in favor of the 27th, just to make sure that we're able to fully flesh this out and make the right decision, get that engagement and input from the community in the interim as well. I do have a question, and I look at the language, and I do wonder, just right off the top of my head, I wonder why we're talking about elephants, felines, primates within the language that's literally right in front of us here on the screen, and excluding other potential wild or exotic animals. I feel like, so to be clear, it's my understanding that this ordinance doesn't prevent exotic or wild animals within traveling acts, which I feel like would be the request of many folks, that prevention would be included here. But nevertheless, it seems like it kind of whittles down into a kind of specific types of animals, as opposed to just talking about wild and exotic animals altogether. And I look at this and I think, we're excluding the possibilities of mistreatment and harm being done to bears, being done to, say, zebras. There's, a list of other animals that could be included here. So why not just talk about wild and exotic animals altogether? Wanted to ask, so bullhooks, prods, whips, we're looking at the potential of eliminating or other devices. And it's my understanding, too, that across the country there have been ordinances and laws passed that are much broader than that would include things like steel bars, golf clubs, shovels, pitchforks, canes, etc. So I was wondering, why exactly do we have that redlined? I mean, this is the draft ordinance, and now we have a draft ordinance that is redlined, and at the same time, it's redlined a little bit later. Can you comment? I don't know if that would be you, Marie.
Yes,
if
sir.
That would be Patrick, but comment on why those are redlined.
Yes, sir. Sorry,
Yeah.
if allowed, sorry. So to your point, we could name, basically anything could be used to injure an animal or cause suffering, right? So that's why the top portion says basically no mechanical, electrical, manual, nothing shall be used to cause physical injury or suffering. So the other pieces that you're calling out would fall more so under that. But then we're taking it even a step further and saying, but we feel like bull hooks, electric prods, or whips have no place to be used. And to be honest, that's where, when we did benchmarking, those are the main ones that are called out by other places. A lot of places just said bull hooks. We added the electric prods or whips, as some other communities do also have that. And to redline other devices was more so based on some of the other feedback that we got from constituents or some professionals that use animals at the February 24th, 2020 meeting. You might need to use some type of device to train an animal, because these are not natural performances, so they might have to have some device, and we're saying, well, okay, that was if it doesn't cause physical injury or suffering.
I read that sentence in a manner that is likely to cause physical injury or suffering, and maybe I'll need to read it a few more times to fully grasp it, but I do kind of look at that and I feel like it's a bit of an alphabet soup as opposed to just a prohibition altogether. With chemical, mechanical, electrical, or manual, I do question and would feel more comfortable if there are assurances that would extend to items such as steel bars, golf clubs. As I mentioned, there's other types of items. I feel like we're going to have more time to talk about this, but my hope is that we don't rush this. It is Tuesday. We're talking about coming back next Monday. That might literally only give us, 3 business days, if even that, to discuss this further and really hammer out something that I think is more conducive to what we're hearing from the community, and certainly more consistent with the trends that we're seeing locally and across the country. So once again, I would be more supportive of a September, I guess it was September 17th.
27th, yes, sir.
27th. Yeah, so that September 27th date, just so that we can, as a council, discuss this more thoroughly. I think there might have been some council members who either were just coming in on this or maybe weren't even on the council at the time that we were discussing all of this. So just to get us all up to speed and make sure that we do have that full-fledged input and community engagement like we normally do when we pass an ordinance. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
All right, thank you, Mr. Newton. I think, did we hear the comments from Mr. Newton and have them documented? Thank you. I want to recognize Ms. Ajmera. Ms. Ajmera?
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. So, first, as Mr. Newton had said, thank you for putting this back on our agenda. I think this language addresses all the concerns that were raised at our public forum. I'll have to go back and review all my notes because I think this was over a year ago when we had discussed this. But I'm comfortable with the language here. And I do look forward to our public forum and see if there is anything that we missed. But I think from just looking at it from my memory, it looks like we've covered everything that was asked from our public forum. So I do look forward to supporting this.
All right, thank you, Ms. Ajmera. Mr. Phipps?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I guess I had a question, about the House bill that's in committee. Does that essentially mean that we as a city council cannot expressly prohibit exotic animal shows without the expressed authority by the North Carolina legislature?
No, sir. There's other cities such as Asheville that currently do expressly ban exotic animal performances, and the state gives the cities authority to act on that. And this bill that within the state is to ban wild and exotic animal performances statewide. So if that passes, then we would not have the authority to allow it. But at this time, we do have the authority to further regulate it, and we have no way of knowing if this bill at the state level is going to move forward and get traction or not.
Oh, okay, because I guess I misinterpreted it, because I thought we said that this ordinance, or we had the authority to disallow harmful practices to animals, but I didn't know that it went so far as to give us the authority to outright ban their participation within our city limits or whatever. So the emails that I've been getting, I don't think they really are satisfied with lessening the potential impact of harm to animals as much as they want to ban their use in any activity within the city. So that's what I found to be interesting. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, Mr. Phipps, thanks very much. Are there any other comments from council members? So as a result of the comments, Mr. Jones, I'm assuming that we'll continue with the language and have it review it with the city attorney's office again. And Ms. Harris was scheduling or looking at it for the 27th?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
All right. So that's the direction the council is going to proceed in. So thank you very much. All right. Our next item are our council committee reports. And I think everybody has a copy of the committee reports. And again, this isn't just like, many of us attend lots of committee meetings, and so I don't think you have to go through everything. What I would ask you to do is think about what challenges you in your discussion in the committee as a chair, that you really feel like you need feedback and, some direction for how other council members who are not participating in your committee would feel about the direction that you're taking for the recommendation. I also wanted to do a couple of things about committees. When 2 years ago, we had in all of our committee assignments a deadline of 30, 60, or 90 days. And I am going to reinstitute that as an idea of how we can actually get things out of committee, because I know that a lot of things have been in committee for a very long time. And if it even requires more than 90 days, it would be the ability to come back and say why it takes more than 90 days, because there's something going on. The second thing that I wanted to say is that in the past, we've talked about our council retreat, and I'm going to send a referral to the Budget and Effective Governance Committee to help arrange an earlier retreat this year as we begin to prepare for some of the major issues that we have that we've actually talked about, transportation and Connect today. But there are other major issues as we come out of this or have plans for how we conduct business during this pandemic, as it continues, or even if it's something that we're coming out of. And this would go to the Budget and Effectiveness Committee for working with the manager for that. And then the next thing I wanted to say is that Mr. Eggleston and the manager and I have been talking about the idea of how do we use technology for Vision Zero. And that will be discussed by the staff in October, and then we'll have a referral to the Safe Communities Committee for that one as well. So just wanted to give you a heads up on some of the things that are coming forward in that regard. So with that, why don't we start with our Workforce and Business Development Committee and see if we can model the behavior that helps us get council reactions to the work that's being done or the questions that are remain unanswered.
Sure. And Madam Mayor, can I also just make a side ask? Are we going to also be able to get an ad hoc committee update from the redistricting committee in this session?
Yes, we will have that tonight as well.
Great. So in light of what the mayor has asked there, I do want to mention one thing from committee that we had today, and then a bit of a call to action that I think is in the spirit of not just repeating what we've heard. Actually, two updates. First update is we heard from Steve and all the great work around MWSBE and CBI stuff that's happening that they've been doing for the last year. We got our annual report today, and just a couple of numbers. 1,207 city-certified MWSBE firms, up 15% from 2019. 95 newly certified African-American vendors in 2020. $26 million is the increased spending with certified businesses. That's up 19%. 21% increased spending with MWSBE prime contractors, which we know is a big goal area of ours, and 15% increased spending with prime MBE firms. So that was a NOAA status update, but I think it was one that's important to relay to make sure everyone knows that work continues and is evolving. And two, we got an update from the Business Alliance today that is on the front end of some analysis they're going to do on incentivization and recruiting companies and retaining companies, looking both internally at our toolkit, at everything we have, but also at peer cities as we look to really formalize our path forward and our future there. So as you all, I think that's the first point of action is we don't always get told things up front and engaged in things up front. And I think this was a good opportunity in a partnership between the city and the Business Alliance. So I think the first call to action of everyone who wasn't in that committee meeting today is think about the things you care about, because we will try to make touch points with them, giving our input as well as getting feedback from them as they go along, so we can be an active participant, at least to some extent, in something that we're going to really be big stakeholders of the output. But I think the big item, and I think this is the challenge that I would relay in the mayor's kind of prompting, is I feel like everything has changed in the last 2 years and the deck has been reshuffled. And all the things we've been doing for decades, or maybe even a couple of years leading into that, as it relates to programs and funding pools, really has had the world ripped out underneath it in the COVID timeline. So we now have all these new groups and parties that have completely different challenges than they had before. And we really need to be thinking about, okay, where are we learning from what we've done in the CBI front? What are we learning with MWSBE programs that we have mature that now might apply to a whole bunch of other groups, small businesses, workforce that have all been challenged? So this is a call to action from all of you to start soliciting feedback beyond just the committee, where we need to know what is it that you're seeing at district levels or at large on the macro level. What other programs do we do that now need to have a lens turned over to small businesses that are struggling everywhere, but also in certain geographic areas like uptown, other places where we haven't had these programs, because we cannot go into another round of funding where we just give grants. And we say, hopefully this extra money, well, we have to retool our businesses for this new season of what's happening. We have to do the same with our workforce. And again, I think the best way we can do this is to not make this a committee thing, to not even just leave this in staff, but we start to compile ideas and lists and things. And I'm going to reach out to all of you individually in the coming weeks to start gathering that. So my ask is to start thinking about, you're hearing, you see emails, you get calls, where are there themes and trends of similar problems that we can create retooling programs, something more than just grants or loans that we give away, to really start to prepare the city for a new normal that is going to keep happening year over year, and we need to get ahead of that. So in that theme, that's the challenge, that, you know, a lot of great work is happening with staff right now, but they can't do this on their own, and there's no better tool than 11 council members and a mayor who literally have their finger on different parts of the pulse of this community. So we've got to do our part in that. And so that would be my call to action amongst all of us, which is start thinking about things you're seeing that don't have programs of support or retooling, and let's gather those up for staff so they can start, you know, analyzing them a little bit and bringing back to us viable options.
Okay, any questions for Mr. Bakari? Okay, thank you, Mr. Bakari, especially the individual outreach. I do think that helps with the production of ideas and more information. All right, our next committee is Budget and Effectiveness. Mr. Driggs.
Thank you, Mayor. In case anybody on council hasn't read all the fine print about our committee meeting discussing the administration and enforcement of the NDO, the wider MPO we adopted on August 9th, I wanted to just give you a high-level kind of synopsis. As we approached this subject, we recognized that there were two different parts to this. One of them was places of public accommodation, and the other one was employment. We got a really excellent presentation from Community Relations Director Willie Ratchford about the working of the Community Relations Committee and his staff, and how they have dealt with issues coming before the NDO that we already had, complaints related to protected classes that were already in existence. Mr. Ratchford recommended, in connection with places of public accommodation, that the new classes be treated the same way as the old classes, that we basically go through a process through which a complaint is submitted. It's considered as to its proper jurisdiction and effectiveness. There is mediation. If that doesn't work it out, there is investigation, there is further remediation, and then ultimately something can be referred to the city attorney. Mr. Ratchford said this procedure has worked well for us since 1968, and in fact, there has never been a case that had to be referred to the city attorney in all of that time, and he feels that just continuing those procedures for the new protected classes makes sense. On the employment side, Mr. Ratchford pointed out that we actually have an excellent process as it relates to housing complaints that could be a model for how we deal with discrimination complaints in the area of employment, which, as you know, is new locally, right? So we did have an NDO before as it related to places of public accommodation, but not for employment. And he pointed out to us the steps and in detail the procedures. You can see it on our committee webpage, how that works, and explained how you basically would proceed the same way if you were trying to investigate and mediate in cases of employment. We did talk about the idea of having fines or some other enforcement mechanisms. Mr. Ratchford pointed out that fines, for example, would probably actually not be helpful because they can undermine the voluntary process that has worked so well in resolving disputes like this. And also, if you have a fine, the city council could impose a fine, or the city could impose a fine. And at that point, whoever the defendant is kind of off the hook as far as we're concerned. It might create a situation where they could pay $500 and then not be answerable to us anymore. So Mr. Ratchford recommended, with which I agree, that we not proceed with enforcement mechanisms like fines. And in the end, the committee voted, there were 3 of us present, we voted unanimously to basically pursue public places of accommodation the same way for the new classes that we do for the old classes, and to use the model of housing complaints for employment situations. That was subject to the proviso, and this is perhaps the topic for further thought by the council, that we consider in the next few months how that is working, whether or not we need to revisit the question of fines, and in particular, whether we need to allocate more resources in our upcoming budget to the enforcement process. Mr. Ratchford said that at present, he feels that we have the resources we would need to process any complaints, and we will be able to identify any shortages there might be in time for our next budget process to consider adding additional funding. And I think those were the main points. So our recommendation to the full council will be that we follow those existing procedures in the implementation of our expanded NDO. Thank you, Mayor.
Ms. Johnson has a question for you, Mr. Driggs.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm a part of the committee, so I just wanted to kind of clarify. When we voted to proceed with the existing process, it was not, it left room available for fines. It was not, according to my understanding, not to discuss fines. And I subsequently heard from the city attorney that fines are a part of our current process. So I don't know if Mr. Baker is available to talk about the fines in our current process, because that was a discussion in the committee that fines were important to the community. So we didn't want to take that off of the table.
So you'd like to ask Mr. Baker? I'm sorry, Ms. Johnson, did you want to ask Mr. Baker to do that?
Yeah, if he's available. And while he is, yeah. And then I have a question also on something you said earlier.
All right, so would you like for me to answer the question, or would you like to hear from Mr. Baker first?
Mr. Baker, can you give the legal opinion publicly that we discussed?
Yes, and I think Mr. Ratchford is here as well. Already in your ordinance is a provision that allows for fines for violation of the ordinance up to $500. That's already in your ordinance, and what we've been discussing at Budget and Effectiveness is what is the process and what is the best way to encourage in those situations where we see problems, encourage compliance with the ordinance. And as Mr. Ratchford has said, in his time here with the city, the focus has always been on conciliation and not on fines or referrals to the attorney's office. But the fines are actually available in your ordinance right now. Mr. Ratchford, if I've misstated anything, please let me know or need to clarify anything.
Are you waiting on Mr. Ratchford?
He shook his head no. There was nothing correct.
Okay, all right, yeah, because after the meeting, I heard from Patrick that fines were part of our current process. I don't know that that information was available during the committee meeting. So I, again, and Mr. Driggs will agree that that was an important topic in the meeting. So the unanimous vote was, given the fact that we still had the option for fines, to invoke the fines for the employers. And then also, Mayor, before we started with the committee reports, you said that you wanted to reinstate the 30, 60, 90-day rule for committee reports.
Yes.
Okay, I was just wondering when that stopped, because it is a part of our charter. So a clarification.
It isn't in the charter. It was something that the council 2 years ago, we've had a committee framework and we put it together, and it was just to encourage us to continue to get things done in a way that would be able to be voted on. And so I can send you a copy of the memo when it went out for you to see it. And it was just something basically to help us keep the trains running.
Okay, excuse me, not charter, our rules of procedure. So
No, it is not in the rules of procedure. It was in a memo that we talked about how do we do committee work and, making sure that there was a referral, that the referral was clear. It was kind of just that format, and it just got dropped somehow with the time frame on it. So that's what I was saying was being reinstated. So it's not in the charter or rules of procedure. It was just a way that we would be working with committees.
Okay, I'm sorry, and maybe Patrick can give an update because there's a procedural, number 14, procedural motion of the rules of procedure in 2019. So if something came out after that, then I wasn't aware. But
well, I'll send you a copy of it, of what we said that we were going to do. And if you have any concerns about it, just bring it up. If you won't have any concerns and don't feel that it adds value, that would be fine. Okay?
Okay, thank you. So then where are we as far as, Patrick, as far as the fines? If the charter does allow that, if we are proposing, and maybe Mr. Driggs, you can follow up, if we're proposing the status quo or we follow the same rules, then fines are included, according to my understanding.
Mr. Driggs, I think Ms. Johnson was
Can I comment on that, Mayor? I just want to clarify the vote we took, as reported in the detailed overview, says that we agreed to go with the model of the existing process, provided that the issues of fines and budget impact will be discussed at a later date. So I think we have left the topic open, but based on advice from Mr. Ratchford, we didn't take any immediate action to specify how fines would be imposed. So we do have the authority, as has now been established, to impose them. We also have the advice that we not do so from our leading practitioner in this space. And I would suggest that we would want to see from our experience with these new protected classes, whether there was a situation that was not resolved in a satisfactory way and might have been through the use of fines. And I think that leaves all of our options open. The point was that we did not want to actually legislate the administration of fines yet. And Mayor, if I may also point out, there are situations, as Mr. Rashford noted, where settlements are agreed upon. So if you have an employment situation, for example, where somebody was wrongfully dismissed, they could obtain back pay in substantial amounts as a result of the conflict resolution process that we have. So it's not as if there are no money implications for the parties, but the question of penalties and trying to devise a penalty that is big enough to deter Bank of America and not so big as to bankrupt smaller companies, it's complicated trying to come up with a fine structure. So again, I hope we can keep this open as we voted to do, and that we can consider whether we encounter situations where a fine might have been necessary or made a difference before going through the procedure of deciding exactly when to impose them and how.
All right, thank you, Mr. Driggs. Any other comments? All right, let's go to our next committee, Transportation Planning and the Environment Committee.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. The committee met on August 23rd, and I apologize, I don't have all of the committee members who were in attendance. However, we had a very full agenda. We had 3 topics on the agenda: an update on the 2040 Plan Policy Map, the Unified Development Ordinance, and the Center City 2040 Plan. And Mr. Smith came and gave us a presentation on that. So, with the 2040 Plan Policy Map, just to remind everybody that we are in that process now, and there's 3 specific phases of community engagement throughout the project. Phase 1, which is going on now, is educating the public about the efforts and seeking their feedback on the place types the community finds most or least desirable. And I know some of the communities have already begun to address that and respond to the planning department. The input will be in the form of a survey, which is currently live and open until October 1st. Also, all Charlotte residents will be receiving postcards in their mailboxes in the next few days, and there's a QR code that will also lead to the survey in addition to the website. So that's phase 1. Phase 2 is a release of the draft 2040 policy map that will reflect the vision that was stated in the comprehensive plan. And then phase 3, the community will have input after the release of that draft to again update the map, and a second draft policy map will be released at the end of the year. The first draft is expected of the plan, the mapped plan, October 2021. The second draft is expected at the end of 2021, and a review and of adoption will go before the TAP committee in early 2022. So just, this is a message for all of my colleagues to make sure to read the 2040 policy map briefing book that staff will send to us every week. It answers our various questions and it'll track the engagement activities. So that's an ongoing, very dynamic process, and it would be really great if everybody can keep up with that. I know it's a lot. The second item that we talked about was the Unified Development Ordinance update. And again, this is the UDO ordinance work has been going on through the Ordinance Advisory Committee that has been meeting since 2016, I believe. Since the pandemic started, those meetings have all been recorded, and you can go back on Facebook Live and look at them. For instance, last week's meeting, they talked about Neighborhood 1 place type and the application of that. So it's really some great information. You can see in there what the topic was. And so if you're interested in sidewalks, you can listen in on that meeting, and I really encourage everybody to do that. Let's see. Starting October 21, there will be 4 drafts of the UDO that will be released. And between each of those releases, comments will be taken and changes made with a goal of a July 2022 decision. One of the major roles of the UDO, again, is to provide regulations that will implement the visions established by the comp plan. There also will be an economic analysis for the UDO to just take a look at the financial impacts of both the cost and savings of the regulatory changes, and that'll be completed by early 2022. People can still engage in the UDO process, even if they're not on those the advisory committee, through charlotteudo.org. And let's see. Then the third area was the Center City 2040 plan, which Michael Smith gave us a presentation on. And basically that is a plan that is being developed in partnership with the city and the county. The Center City Partners is taking the lead on it and working with a consultant. The draft plan was released in July of 2021. And basically the project study area includes Uptown and the adjacent neighborhoods, and it's basically a 2-mile radius around Trade and Tryon. And it was meant to be a big picture vision for the growth of the urban core and the places that we want Center City to become over the next 2 decades. Their presentation, although we didn't get all of these, included 350 recommendations on different policies, projects, and programs over the short and long term. And again, it was a very holistic visionary strategy to guide growth and change, support opportunity for the community, and support intentional, purposeful, equitable growth. Now I say that, however, we had a 2-hour meeting and we didn't get through all of this material. So with regards, we had a lot of questions about the UDO and the Center City plan that didn't get addressed, and drilled down a little bit deeper. On the Center City plan, there's a lot of concern about how it is going to mesh with our transformational mobility plan, our transit plan, parking. What are the specifics on how there will be a plan for parking, and how does that match up with our goals for people using transit and public transportation? And so we have another opportunity to ask those questions, because we planned another meeting in September, on September 22nd, to go a little bit deeper. So I know a number of colleagues joined us in that committee meeting, and I would really strongly encourage everybody who can participate on September 22nd to join us again. And in advance, you can share your questions or comments about those 2 plans, the UDO and Center City 2040 plan, to Lynn Alexander, and we'll get all those questions in there in advance, hopefully, and then we'll address it in that meeting on September 22nd. So that is it, Madam Mayor.
All right, thank you very much. Any questions for the Chair of the Transportation, Planning, and Environment Committee? Mr. Bakari?
Yeah, I would just add, because I want to make this comment every time we hear it, that economic impact analysis must contain some effort to help us quantify the impacts to affordability with some of the decisions that were made.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other comments? Okay. All right. So our next committee is Great Neighborhoods.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. The Great Neighborhoods Committee met August 18th, and we had 3 or 4 really good discussion points. One is the work that the Legacy Commission is doing. They're doing some outstanding work in reference to the community engagement aspect of the street names. They have already changed 2 names. One is in Druid Hills, which is now Druid Hills Way. The other is on Pfeiffer Avenue, has been changed to Mumford Point Street. The thing that was most impressive about both of those is just the process that the staff went through to engage the public, to make sure that there was community feedback, make sure that folks understood what they were doing, why they were doing it, as well as providing the resources necessary to make the name change, especially in Druid Hills, a lot easier and user-friendly. Pfeiffer Avenue didn't have any homes or businesses, so that was basically a no-brainer. But the Druid Hills way change was very involved. It gave staff an opportunity to really test run the community engagement process, and they came through in flying colors. The official street sign change will occur on September 25th, and I'm pretty sure that everyone will receive an invitation to come out to attend that. Community outreach is currently underway for Alcott Lane, Jackson Avenue, and Zebulon Avenue. Replacing of those names will occur in September and October with an tentative approval in November. And so the Legacy Commission is up and running and doing a great job. Secondly, the council made a motion to move forward the NOAA rental subsidy program to full council for consideration. The committee discussed this program to create a new rental subsidies for households earning 30% of less of median income. That is going to council for your consideration. In addition, the rental subsidy requirement for city-supported housing is also coming to full council for your consideration as well. So those are basically the highlights from the Great Neighborhoods Committee. I won't go into any more details. You have the report in front of you. Our next meeting is coming up next week, September 15th, and currently there's no outstanding referrals towards the Great Neighborhoods Committee. So we're caught up. Staff is doing a great job under the direction of our housing director, Ms. Weidman, and so we are officially moving forward per the request of council.
All right, any questions for Mr. Graham?
Yes, Ms. Johnson.
Ms. Johnson, you recognized?
Mayor, Mr. Graham, could you give some details about the subsidies for the cities, or the rental subsidies for city-supported housing?
If Ms. Wyman is in the building, she might be other than, but I'm just going to kind of outline what you've already been presented. So if there's a specific question, Ms. Wyman, I think is there to answer that question for you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so my question then is, are we proposing that any project that receives city funding will accept rental subsidies? Ms. Weidman.
Hold on, I don't know that Ms. Weidman is in the room. Ms. Jackson's checking now.
Okay.
I'm sorry, she is no longer in the building. So can we just get a report back to you and have it sent out, Mr. Jones? Would that be appropriate? Okay, Mr. Jones will get a report, an answer to your question, and get it sent out.
Well, let me just put on record what my concern would be. Make sure I'm on track with what's going on. So initially, we talked about any developer that received or accepted TIG or any type of subsidy from the city to develop housing would accept rental subsidy and housing choice vouchers or any type of subsidies. And it's my understanding the direction that the committee might be going is if those developers, they'll accept the housing choice vouchers or the rental subsidies in housing that they deem affordable. So I want to make sure that we as council are at least discussing, and that I would support, that those developers be required to accept those vouchers on all of the units that they develop with public dollars. So that's affordable or market rate. So that's a big distinction that I want to make sure doesn't get lost on council. We're not asking that they accept the subsidies just on their affordable housing. We're asking for public dollars not to be used for discriminatory practices and not accepting rental subsidies.
And we did discuss that.
Shit. I left my glasses.
Oh.
Someone's not muted.
My glasses.
Someone's going to want to make sure they're muted.
Somebody lost their glasses.
Someone lost their glasses.
Mr. Jones will circle back with you later.
We did discuss that in the committee meeting, and that will be a point of discussion when it comes before the Phil Council. If you read the write-up in the report, it talks about the affordable housing component, but not all projects. So that's a point of distinction that we did talk about at the committee meeting that I'm pretty sure that you'll have more questions to ask around that when it comes to full council.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right, thank you very much. The next committee is Safe Communities. Mr. Eggleston.
Thank you, Mayor. You touched on half of this report at the outset.
Sorry.
Here. That's all right. We'll just make it even shorter. We did discuss and have discussed now over the last month or two an issue that I know is top of mind for everyone on council. We hear from constituents all the time around the unsafe driving that's going on in our city and how unsafe our streets can be. And I think COVID has exacerbated that. And actually one of our own colleagues has experienced the danger that we can encounter on our streets in the last week with members of his family. So that is something that's top of mind for all of us. We quantified the problem in a conversation with CMPD. We talked and outlined the ways that they are constantly working on that problem, but also discussed potential new solutions, technology-based solutions, new ways to try to rein in the reckless behavior we see on our streets in things like speeding, red light running, and the like. As Mayor Lyles stated, we will, as a full council at the strategy session in October, take that up and determine what specific items we want to refer back to the Community Safety or Safe Communities Committee for consideration. And so that's where we've left that for now. We'll come back to it at our next strategy session. Violence Interrupter Program was the other primary topic of our last committee meeting. Federico Rios gave us an update on the Alternatives to Violence initiative, which many of you are aware. We're working collaboratively with the county, Wells Fargo, and Greenlight Fund partnered to provide us with $1.2 million in support of the Violence Interrupter Program. Belton Platt, who many of you know, and we had a press conference to announce this, I guess about a month ago, was selected as the supervisor for this program along Beatties Ford, which is where we are piloting the program. 4 others were hired as violence interrupters and outreach workers. They're currently working in a space in the church off West Boulevard, but they have located office space along Beatties Ford Road, which they will move into in November or December, adjacent to the Northwest School of the Arts at 1401 Beatties Ford Road. So progress is being made there. We will circle back on the street safety conversation in October, and that concludes my report.
Any questions for Mr. Eggleston? Ms. Johnson?
That's from before, I think.
I think that must have been the other one. Okay, so thank you. No, you don't have any questions? All right, so our last committee report is intergovernmental, and we have 2 co-chairs there, Mr. Winston and Mr. Bakari. You're up.
Yeah, I'll just take a first cut. Mr. Winston, you can add anything, but we don't have a whole lot to report. The General Assembly has been bogged down completely in the budget negotiations and process. We've obviously been watching that very closely. We're hoping that things will start moving again very shortly on that front. And we have recently started communicating again about starting to think about our next legislative agenda round, of which we've had discussions in committees today, as well as other things for some noble causes that could be on there. But Mr. Winston, feel free to add anything. I think it's kind of we're in a bit of a lull period for where we are right now.
Yeah, well, to that end, I think everybody should continue to pay attention to those Friday legislative roundups that Mr. Fenton sends to us. I think to Mr. Bakari's point, when we do have to work or give guidance, it's kind of off of those updates that we're getting. So it's kind of a fluid fluid work that we're doing in that committee right now. But to that legislative agenda point, it is time, the natural time for us to start thinking about this. And to the mayor's point earlier, I think it would be very helpful in the next 30 days if council members got any types of issues or particular legislation that you would like for us to consider putting on that legislative agenda, to get that into me, Mr. Bakari, and Mr. Fenton in the next 30 days, so staff and the committee can do some work and some research in the next 60 days, and hopefully we can get a legislative agenda adopted in a 90-day period. So that's what we have. Happy to answer any questions or take any conversations offline. Thanks.
Okay, so I have a request, $12 billion for transportation and a bus system and all of the things that we want. So just get that on the list and you guys get to working on it. I would appreciate that very much.
I think you bring up an excellent point, though.
Thank you. I'm seriously now. Let me make sure. Are there any questions for Mr. Winston and Mr. Bakari? Okay. Well, that is now time to go circle back to Mr. Graham. He had his first meeting of the ad hoc redistricting committee today, and he'd like to give a report and as well address some of, I think, ask for when can we get to some of those recommendations, Mr. Graham. So, Mr. Graham, it's yours.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Actually, it was our second meeting.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
Of the redistricting committee. We had our first meeting in late August, our second meeting today. And today is when we really begin to kind of dive into the work of the redistricting committee. Many of you have received an email from me kind of outlining the charge that the mayor gave to us, as well as the preliminary data that we received when the census and when the Department of Commerce actually released the first data dump. I sent an email relating to that as well. And so today, meetings really revolved about a couple of things. One, the committee established our ground rules. We reviewed the law and the criteria for selecting the districts, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. We talked about the census data. The official data from the Department of Commerce should be in by the end of September, but staff has been able to work to get the numbers now. It's a lot harder than waiting for the Commerce Department, but our brilliant staff has been able to work through the systems and getting us numbers now. So we're really getting our early start on putting things in place. We also talked about Map Drawing 101, which is an opportunity for some of the new council members who have not been familiar with the redistricting process to kind of get like a little kit that should be in your packages this week. And we also talked more importantly about the schedule. The mayor outlined in her charge that she wanted us to bring back to council for a decision on November 8th, and the committee has accepted that challenge from her. And so what we did was outline a very aggressive schedule to meet that deadline, starting with the committee meeting today and working backwards. And so there are a number of items that we will be working towards in terms of coming up on our calendar. One in particular is meeting with all the council members individually Monday or Tuesday of next week, and that has already been sent out to everyone to schedule an appointment time to meet with the city attorney, the chairman, as well as the consultant that we hired to help us along the way from Parker Poe, as well as city staff from planning. So we'll be meeting with every council member individually to talk specifically about what we're doing, why we're doing it, and more importantly for the district reps getting a better understanding of your district before we make any changes to them. The committee dates, again, is September 13th and 14th for the meeting with the district council members. We'll have another meeting on September 20th, as well as on October 5th, which we will receive public comments based on the maps that we outlined. And then we will also have a public hearing, which is different from the public comments, which will be October 18th, leading up to a council vote on November 8th. We did make an action item today regarding the criteria for district, putting the districts together, right? Every district has to have plus or minus 125,000 voters in them. Some districts are out of whack. For an example, District 3 is plus 16,000. District 2 is probably about plus 7,000. District 7 is right on keel, 125,000. But all the districts will have to be kind of looked at. Part of what we talked about today to make this work, again, 125,000 plus or minus per district, we will probably have to move residents from District 3, 2, and 4 to District 1, 6, and 5 to create something closer to 125,000 plus or minus. And so now that we kind of know the direction that we're headed to, we made an adjustment to the criteria based on what we already know. Two adjustments that we made was the committee by a 3-0 vote. Councilmember Driggs was not present at the time of the vote, but we did inform him in terms of the vote that we took, which was to delete this quote, when possible, districts should have relatively even partisan balance. We strike that from one of the criteria. And secondly, district boundaries may not be drawn to create/maintain balance between major political parties. That also passed 3-0. So both of those statements have been struck from our district criteria because what we not want to do was to set unrealistic expectation for the public as well as council members. Lastly, one of the things that I am, as chairman, as well as committee members, have said that we want to be as transparent as possible. That's why, you're getting emails from me. We've talked about a public education and engagement process that we're working with city communication to make sure that we communicate what we're doing, why we're doing it, to what extent we're doing it, through all the city communication channels, which is Facebook, Twitter, whatever. We want to be intentional about communicating to the public in terms of educating them, as well as engaging them for feedback, i.e. the public comments on October 5th and the public hearing on October 18th. In addition, there's been a web page established for the redistricting committee where all our maps, our committee notes and meetings will be placed there. And we're establishing an email address so if citizens want to email us questions, comments, or recommendations, they can do that as well. And so the day really kind of kicked off the process. There's a lot of work that we have to do in a short period of time. We're committed to making the schedule that has been outlined by the committee and the challenge by the mayor to get it done by November 8th. And it's not just an arbitrary deadline that we're trying to meet. We have to give the information to the Board of Elections so that they can go ahead and begin the process of establishing new maps, getting ready for the election, filing in December, et cetera. And so if we make a decision by November 8th, we buy ourselves about 2 weeks. We got some fluff built into that. But based on the way we outlined it today, I'm cautiously optimistic without any unforeseen hurdles along the way that we could do the job, do it right, be transparent, and be available to the public to answer any questions they may have as we move along the way. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
All right, thank you. You have some questions, Mr. Graham, and Mr. Picari would like to be recognized.
Yeah, I have a really big concern about that action taken in the committee today. I understand of the first of the two items, the first one a bit. When possible, districts should have relatively even partisan balance. And you guys striking that, I don't know that was necessary because it says when possible and kind of leaves it in there, but geographically speaking, I can understand Charlotte kind of being in a position where that is nearly impossible, if not impossible. So that's not where my issue is. The second one that was deleted, and again, these are the criteria for selecting the districts. This is beyond concerning to me, and I'll read it again for the public. It says district boundaries may be drawn to create or maintain balance between major political parties. So the deleting of that just doesn't make a lot of sense to me. And that doesn't mean in spirit that it needs to be 50-50 because Charlotte is not 50-50. However, Charlotte is just about 20% Republican. It's about 46 or so % Democrat. And it's about 34% independent. And that will change as we get the new numbers, but not dramatically from that point. So when you think of an 11-person council, in spirit, what that means is that there are 5 districts or 5 seats that are pretty strongly Democrat, 2 seats that are strongly Republican, and another 4 seats that are toss-ups, again, from the unaffiliated perspective, that could go either way. Now, that's in a perfect world where geographies and other things like that don't come into a play. But for me, that's where the map makers, the consultants, the people we come in, go in and see how good they can do at getting to that point. And for us to delete that as a criteria for selecting districts, essentially a principle that we hand them to say, do your best at this. I mean, to me, that's voter suppression. That's literally the definition of that. And it's up to us to protect Charlotteans' right to vote. So I can't fathom how that became an item that was acceptable to delete in that committee. And I certainly hope there's a way where the full council in front of this entire community has a chance to weigh in on this before it gets handed back to our consultants and map makers, because this is just quite frankly unacceptable.
Okay. Any other comments or questions? I'm sorry. Mr. Winston?
Yes, thank you. One thing I think we should really look at when we're redistricting is not just the balance now, but the balance that will be in 8 to 10 years from now. To see, so I really hope that especially that being that we have so much data around growth patterns, growth strategies, and such. That we can draw lines with the anticipation of future growth, especially as we think about future development around transportation corridors. And I'd like to know how, obviously we can't answer that necessarily right now, but how we're building that into the map making for districts.
That's a very good question, Councilmember Winston, and we talked about that. Notice I said plus or minus. The goal is for, I'll use Council District 3 for an example, that's a high growth area for the city, right? And so the average is 125. We may draw a map that's less than 125,000 to allow for growth in that district. District 2 has a similar type of growth pattern. District 4 has a similar type of growth pattern. And so it may be below the 125K number to allow for growth as we draw the maps. So your point is well taken.
Very much.
All right, Mr. Driggs, followed by Mr. Phipps. Mr. Phipps, are you raising your hand?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Driggs, followed by Mr. Phipps.
Thank you, Mayor. So I share Mr. Bakari's concern. The wording that was taken out is a little tricky to interpret. So it's obvious that with the numbers the way they are, we can't try to have kind of equal representation of the two parties on the body. And so I'm kind of watching and waiting. And as the chair pointed out, I wasn't there for these votes. I'm watching and waiting because the other information we got was that maps would be developed, draft maps would be developed for us to look at that either minimized, just plain minimized the number of precincts that had to be moved to different districts, or best responded to some of our other priorities. And so we're going to be in a mode of looking at different maps, and council members will be able to consider as they look at those maps how the precincts kind of relate to their adjacent precincts, where you might have a group of precincts that belong to a larger subcommunity. In the course of those conversations, I'm hoping that we can respect the concept that preserving some representation by both of the parties is a goal that we should aspire to. I don't think single party government is healthy, regardless of which party it is. And without wordsmithing that particular provision that was taken out, I think there ought to be an understanding that we will look at a map favorably that has the effect of preserving representation, some representation by both parties. The difficulty is when you get into that equal concept, but we're 9-2 right now, which is already not really representative of the mix of people in Charlotte. They kind of probably an 8-3 or even a 7-4 would be more representative of the actual mix of the community. And I hope this doesn't turn out to be an opportunity to create districts in which no one from the minority party has any real prospect of winning. So that's a conversation that we'll have to continue. And but I don't know that the wording that was taken out would have really protected us against that. And I see us discussing that in the future. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Driggs. Mr. Phipps.
Yeah, with respect to having a reduced number of residents, less than 125,000 in districts 2, 3, and 4, I think some of the thinking was that those areas, those particular districts are adjacent to areas that are in the ETJ, and that it's quite possible that during sometime in the next 10 years or so that some of those will be coming into being annexed voluntarily into some of those districts, and it would, and that cushion would give space to be able to absorb those residents without arbitrarily kicking that number back up. So I think that was part of the reason for having a reduced number of residents in those 3 districts.
All right. Mayor Pro Tem?
Yeah, I just want to point out also that we had an opportunity when the Citizen Governance Committee met. They made a recommendation that we consider adding another district. Personally, I think that was an opportunity that we sort of didn't vet well enough. When you talk about redrawing these lines and concerns about the balance and whatnot, and now you're talking about adding population from the ETJ, I hope that it's not going to be 10 years before that conversation is revisited, because as it is, what is it, 120, we're supposed to get to 125,000 per district? Is that right, Mr. Ballpark? Yeah. Ballpark. That's bigger than most North Carolina cities, one district. So I want to put that out there for council to, keep in the back of their mind that at some point we might need to add another district on our council. So that's all.
All right. Anyone else? Any other comments? All right. So that is the last committee report. Thank you very much.
Mayor?
I'm sorry. Who's talking?
This is Watson.
Oh, Mr. Graham?
I would defer to Councilmember Arlington.
Thank you, Councilmember Graham.
Where is she?
I'm right here. Can you see me?
No.
No. Let me try
How long have you been there?
Okay. Since about
5'11".
5'11".
I was asking someone, has anybody seen Victoria? Is she okay? So now we know. All right.
just lurking. No, I just wanted to lift up that I agree with Mayor Pro Tem. I think this is an excellent time to have that conversation. I think it was one of the larger items that came out of the governance committee. And so I just want to go on record that I agree with her that we should not take that option off the table at this point. And I'd love to hear from my colleagues where folks kind of stand on considering that additional district.
Okay.
And now I'll speak. One, it was not the charge that the redistricting committee was given, so we did not take that into consideration at all because it was not in our charging documents. And secondly, in reference to the comment from Mr. Driggs, the spirit of the committee is to be transparent and fair and balanced, given the numbers that we have. Mr. Bukhari is right. We're only really dealing with 7 seats, right? Because 4 are at large. The voters can have their say either way. But the numbers are the numbers are the numbers, right? And we can't create numbers that don't exist. The only thing that we can do is do our best with the consultants, the individuals from planning, and deal with the numbers that we have to make the best decision based on the criteria that we have. So there was no sleight of hand in reference to democracy, right? It was just making sure that as we enter this process, that we enter it with open eyes and realistic expectations. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Graham. So I do believe that's the last speaker that we have for the council committee items. I'd like to, we have one more item on our agenda, and that is a closed session. And before we go into the closed session, I have a motion, and Donata, I've lost the sheet of paper, to say that because we are going into closed session, we are going to adjourn immediately after the closed session, and that will allow us to leave at this point. So with that, I need a motion to go into closed session pursuant to NC General Statute 148-318, 11A6, to consider the qualifications, competence, performance, character, fitness, conditions of appointment, or conditions of initial employment of an individual public officer or employee. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
And we had a second. Any discussion about the motion? Hearing no discussion, I'll go through a roll call. Ms. Ashmira?
Yes.
Mr. Phipps?
Yes.
Mr. Winston? Mr. Bukhari?
Yes.
Mr. Driggs?
Yes.
Mr.
Yes.
Eggleston?
Yes.
Mr. Graham?
Yes.
Ms. Johnson?
Yes.
Mr. Newton?
Yes.
Ms. Watlington?
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem? Yep. All right. The motion passes with the majority, with the exception of Mr. Winston, who is no longer online with us. So with that, we will adjourn at the end of our closed session, and we're now prepared to go into closed session.
Yes.
Let's take a 5-minute break for everybody. Oh, there you are, Mr. Winston. Thank you. So we'll take a 5-minute break. I've got 7:41, so 7:46, and we'll be back.